Hello, and you are very welcome to this webinar as part of WSET's Virtual Open Day, where we're going to be exploring how you can elevate your spirits knowledge using the WSET suite of spirits qualifications, and also hopefully elevate your career within the drinks industry. A few notes before we get started. For those of you who may not be familiar with the WSET already, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust is the world's leading provider of wine, spirits, sake, and beer courses. WSET has over 50 years experience in designing and delivering education to help both wine professionals and consumer enthusiasts learn about wine, spirits, beer, and sake. You can take qualifications in over 70 countries through a network of over 800 course providers. And if you're interested in finding out more about embarking on your WSET journey or advancing your WSET journey further, having taken a qualification already, then visit wsetglobal.com to find your nearest course provider. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and it will be available to watch via the WSET Events Hub on YouTube, and attendees who are watching live will also be sent the link afterwards. If you have questions along the way, please post them in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we will try to cover as many questions at the end as possible in a Q&A session. Okay, so that is the housekeeping over, and I may as well introduce myself properly. My name is Charlie McCarthy. I am Business Development Manager for the Spirits Qualifications here at WSET. And essentially what that means is that it is my job to build awareness of our qualifications, demand for our spirits qualifications, and supply for our spirits qualifications globally. I have a background stretching back over 15 to 20 years now in the hospitality industry. Before that, believe it or not, I was an actor working on stage in the US, Ireland, and the UK. And I took my love of sharing experiences there and developed it into my career as a cocktail bartender. And from working as a cocktail bartender, where I discovered a real fascination with flavor and how all the flavors fit together within spirits and cocktails, I went on to work in brand advocacy. And I then had a little stint working as a consultant to the luxury hotel industry with companies like the Gorgeous Group and the Doyle Collection, helping set up bars and train bar teams around the world. I joined WSET in 2019, and I hold the WSET Level 3 Award in Spirits, of course. And I also happen to hold the Level 3 Award in Wine, the Level 2 Award in Sake, and the Level 2 Award in Beer. And if you'd like to hear any more about those qualification streams, please do stay tuned for my colleagues who'll be explaining a bit more about those later. But for right now, we're going to talk about spirits. And for the longest time, WSET was primarily a wine education institution, and spirits were a chapter or an addendum within some of the larger wine qualifications. Over the course of about 2012 to 2019, these qualifications uncoupled entirely, and that culminated with the launch of WSET Level 3 Spirits in 2019. We have just refreshed the Level 3 Spirits, and I'm going to be talking a bit more about that later. But before we get onto that, I'm going to walk through what a Level 1 Spirits, Level 2 Spirits, and Level 3 Spirits course feels like and what you could get out of those as a student. So, Level 1 can sometimes be overlooked, but really, at Level 1, when we're talking about theory at Level 1, we want the students to know the what of the spirits, just to have a basic understanding of what is whiskey, what is vodka, what is brandy, etc. It's studied in the classroom over 6 hours or using our online classroom over 4 weeks online, and it culminates in a multiple choice exam with 30 questions. Level 2 is a substantial step up from Level 1, and the aim at Level 2 is to gain broader knowledge within categories and within styles, and to develop an understanding of how was that spirit made and how those choices in that production of that spirit influence the style, the category, and the flavor of that spirit. It's an intermediate qualification, whereas Level 1 is an introductory qualification. And for Level 1, we would recommend that for anybody starting out their career in hospitality or in fast-moving consumer goods. It's a very cost-effective way of developing a bit of knowledge about spirits, and anyone who's, for instance, retail staff or senior managers from other fast-moving consumer goods find it a very powerful introduction to the world of spirits. For level 2, however, being a bit more of an intermediate qualification, we find that it's very suitable for people who want to start, who already have a little bit of experience in the drinks industry. Maybe they're a cocktail bartender, maybe they work front of house, they work in retail, they work in sales or in marketing or brand reps, something like that. You can start directly at level 2, but if you don't have that much experience, we do recommend starting at level 1. And the goal of level 2 is developing understanding for the student. Understanding about how is this made? How is this spirit made? And getting to understand kind of the bones of how spirits fit together. The course is delivered over 15 hours in the classroom. That's typically done over 2 or 2.5 days. And you are required to study in your own time with 11 hours of private study time. It can also be studied using our online classroom over 5 weeks online, and it culminates in a multiple choice exam of 50 questions. Then we move on to level 3, which is a substantial jump up from level 2. And at level 3, whereas at level 1, it's the what, level 2, it's the how, level 3, it's the why. We want you to develop a very comprehensive understanding of spirits, how they're made, why they're made, the laws and regulations governing them, how that impacts the style. And it's as it's an advanced qualification, we recommend that anybody considering studying level 3 should have the level 2 before they start the level 3, because that is the knowledge and the skills from level 2 are going to be assumed of the student at the start of level 3. It's a really great step up if you're an educator, a manager, a trainer, a brand ambassador, a category ambassador, or you're working in production, for instance. And we're going to hear from somebody later who's worked in several of those roles and how it impacted on their career and the knowledge and the skills that they got from level 3 having a positive impact in that direction. At level 3, you're going to be required to explain why does this production technique have this result. And it does become quite in-depth. We'll see some examples of that later in this seminar. It is taught in the classroom over 33 hours, but most importantly, it requires a minimum of 51 hours private study time. And that's a significant commitment. So if you're thinking of embarking on a level 3 course, make sure that you are scheduling enough time to give yourself the time to do yourself justice in the classroom. It can also be studied on our online classroom over 10 weeks. And it culminates in a 3-part exam. The first part of that exam is multiple choice exam with 50 questions. Then you have short written answers. And these are like short essays where you're going to be asked to synthesize knowledge from different parts of the textbook and the course into a comprehensive and cohesive answer to a question, well, to a series of questions in this example. And then the other part is the tasting assessment. And in the tasting assessment, you will be asked to provide a complete description and quality assessment of 2 samples that you will be given blind, i.e. you will not be told anything about them other than these are the liquids in your glass. It can be quite challenging, but it's also a lot of fun. But whether you're studying at level 1, 2, or 3, the backbone of our theory is always the steps that it takes to go from the raw material through to the spirit. And there are always 4 key stages of production, and these are consistent across all levels. The first is processing the raw material to create a sugary liquid. We then take that sugary liquid and we introduce yeast to ferment it to create an alcoholic liquid with congeners. We then take that liquid and we distill it in order to select and to concentrate the alcohol and the congeners. And then in post-distillation, we will make the necessary legal or stylistic adjustments to the color, the sweetness, the flavor, or the alcoholic strength of the liquid. It may sound a little confusing at now, but we're going to see how that works at each level. Another part of all of our courses is tasting, and this is a foundational part of every WSET course. Tasting at level 1, we just want to encourage students to be able to analyze spirits for the first time. A lot of time at level 1, the student will not have thought about spirits analytically. So it's just, what does this taste like? It's developing confidence in developing that vocabulary. At level 2, we want the students to understand the impact of the production choices and how that links to the flavor and the character of the spirit, and how that differs from another spirit or another spirit within the same category. At level 3, the students need to be able to explain comprehensively a complete description of the spirit and explain why it is a certain quality level. And that's quite a challenge, and that's a skill set that we do spend a lot of time on in the classroom at level 3. So, Tasting skills are very important. And what I'm going to go through here is a little explanation of the DNA of the WSET pedagogy. Tasting skills in and of themselves are wonderful things. And if I'm tasting a spirit, I can tell it has pronounced aromas of vanilla and coconut, along with some sweet corn and rye, and some esters. I'm giving the game away slightly here, but of apple and orange, and that's a dry spirit with no sugar added. Well, that's wonderful. I've tasted the spirit. I've done a good analysis of the spirit. But that doesn't exist in a vacuum. And what we do is we teach the theory that overmaps with those tasting skills. And that knowledge will then tell us that if these are pronounced aromas, well, it must have had a low distillation strength. If those aromas are of vanilla and coconut, that's most likely come from new oak rather than old oak. And then the aromas of corn and rye will come from the raw material. The esters, as I gave the game away a little bit, are the fruity aromas. And this spirit is dry, i.e. there is no sugar added. And it's, again, that knowledge is really powerful. It's a really powerful thing for a student to walk away with. But that's not enough for us. What we really want as WSET educators is for the student then to be able to take that understanding of how those elements link and be able to take that out into the wide world afterwards and apply it to their practice. And really, it's in this linking mechanism that the real value of a WSET education really shines. For instance, if we look at this aspect of the dry spirit, it's dry, it has no sugar added. Then the question might come at level 2, why? So, oh, it has no sugar added because I can tell from these other flavor characteristics that this is a bourbon. Okay, great. And can bourbon have sugar added post-distillation? Well, no, I can tell from my textbook that no sugar addition is allowed post-distillation. And furthermore, I know that all distillates are dry, i.e. they have no sugar. Therefore, if it is dry, that means that it has no sugar and no sugar has been added because it is a legal requirement. So that connective tissue is really where a lot of the value sits within a WSET education. So we're going to do a quick breeze through level 1 and level 2 using the example of agave spirits such as tequila and mezcal to see the level of detail that you can expect to encounter at level 1 and at level 2. So what will you learn in general at level 1? Well, you'll learn the main production processes and the types of stills. You'll also learn the principal categories and the typical spirits of each of those categories. And also we'll touch on aromatized wines. Why aromatized wines? It's a spirits course, not a wines course. Well, we touch on aromatized wines because aromatized wines are primarily used within the cocktail bar scene. And you think of your martini, your Negroni, these all use aromatized wines. So we do touch on the principles of cocktail creation and the cocktail families. And this, in the context of an introductory course, is very useful for people who are coming to the industry anew. It gives them a very solid understanding and it helps to cut through some of the confusion for them. We also taste at level 1, as we do at every level, and we just want students to be able to walk away with confidence to make a basic description of their spirit. We're not going to assess them on tasting at level 1. We're very much encouraging them to develop their vocabulary and their skill set at level 1. And if we're talking about the theory of agave spirits, well, what do we learn at level 1? Stage 1, what is the raw material? Blue agave. Stage 2, fermentation happens where you may add other sugars and yeast will be added. Stage 3, distillation. Hot stills are typically used. Stage 4, post-distillation. The spirit may be unaged, it may be oak-aged, and it may have the addition of caramel coloring. So you can see within the context of a one-day course how the student is getting a solid foundational level of knowledge without having any expectation of going in too deep to the course. So another thing that is underpinning everything in all our courses, obviously, is the tasting. So this is our systematic approach to tasting spirits. It's different from the systematic approach to tasting wines or beers or sake. They each have their own systematic approach because they're very different criteria apply in each case. If I was tasting, for instance, a high quality, unaged, 100% agave tequila, I would simply say, this is a colorless spirit. It has a pronounced aromatic intensity on the nose with raw material notes of agave, some processing fermentation notes of lemon zest and apple, and no oaken maturation. On the palate, it has got no sugar, therefore it is dry, and it has got a warming, oily texture. And again, on the flavor characteristics, I can taste those agave, baked root vegetables, warming orange and apple notes with some more citrus coming from the processing and fermentation. And again, no oak and maturation. The finish on such a spirit, we could expect it to be long with some complexity. So at level 1, you're giving a comprehensive description of the spirit without having to go into a whole lot of detail. Then we're going to jump to level 2. And after we spent a little time talking about level 2, we're going to listen to someone who's gone through the levels and who teaches the levels in a cocktail bar setting to give an understanding of how they can be beneficial and what the different aspects of each course are suitable for. So what do we learn at level 2? Again, we're looking at the main production factors that affect style, and we'll go through the 4 key stages of production for this. We look at the principal types and the key characteristics of each main category of spirit, and principal types of flavored spirits and aromatized wines. And again, within this, we're not just looking at one benchmark for each category anymore. Within Scotch, we're going to look at a single malt and a blend. Within cognac, we may look at a young cognac like a VS and a more aged cognac like a VSOP or an XO. So we're looking at comparisons for quality level and style within each category now. And then we touch again on the principles of cocktail creation and the cocktail families, just reinforcing some of that knowledge from level 1. But also if somebody starts at level 2, which they are perfectly entitled to do, just gives them a solid basis on that idea of what cocktail families are and how cocktails work in terms of balance. For tasting, excuse me while I taste some water, we're developing a bit more of an advanced skill set in tasting here. In tasting, we want to be able to describe the style and the quality of the spirit for the first time. So there's going to be a bit more advanced from level 1, where kind of a competent description was acceptable and encouraged. Now we're going to look for a bit more detail. And looking at agave spirits as an example of a spirit category that we teach at level 2, you can see there's a bit more information. The page is filling out a bit more here. We look at the types of different agaves, the types of cooking that might be used to convert the starch in the agave, the name of that starch, the type of crushing, the use of diffusers, which is a complex mechanism that is used in a certain style of tequila. We'll also look at the addition of other sugars. What is cultured yeast and how is it applied in the context of tequila? The addition of agave fibers in this fermentation and formulation stage, which is a unique thing to agave spirits. And then within distillation, we're going to look at the different types of stills that can be used across different types of agave spirits and the timing of the cuts. Now, the cuts essentially, for those of you who are not aware, is when the distillate comes off the still, you're going to select really the most desirable part of that distillate to go on and be bottled or aged and for use in your final spirit. And this is something that I think is very useful when talking to people, particular people in the bar industry. A lot of cocktail bartenders, quite rightly, want to be taken seriously as gastronomic professionals. And a lot of the time they say, why don't people take me seriously? I've studied, I've got a lot of knowledge, and sometimes having that certification, having that qualification can help. But more so than that, the knowledge that you develop through a level 2 course and a level 3 course, when it comes to the timing of the cuts and what that means about the spirit, is going to show that you really know your stuff when it comes to spirits. I liken it to a good chef will go to a butcher and they'll know which cuts of meat they want. And a good bartender should be able to understand the different cuts that are used in spirits and how that affects the style, the quality, and the character of the spirit. And then that in turn is going to affect how they know they can use that spirit in a cocktail context. In a post-distillation phase, we're looking at a bit more detail here again, the different types of maturation vessels and the different type of additives, including an additive called avocado. And you get to understand at level 2 what that means, what the purpose of it is, and how it can affect the style and the quality of the spirit. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail here because that's for something for us to do in the course, but I just want to give you a flavor at this stage of the level of detail that a student could expect to encounter at each level. For the SAT becomes a bit more complex at level 2. It's very similar when it comes to the appearance, but then when we get into the nose, we're going to be asked to really delve into a lot more detail into the raw material processing, fermentation, distillation, oak and maturation. And at level 2, we've got a tool to aid us here called the lexicon. And the lexicon is found on the flip side of the physical version of the SAT. And that's a series of prompt words that are going to be very useful for the student in suggesting what aromas are created from what stage of production. For instance, the typical aromas that you might expect from oak aging will include vanilla, coconut, char, toast, baking spices, etc. And then on the palate, we're going to talk in a more structured way about the sweetness, in a much more structured way about the texture and about the intensity. But again, we're developing more depth, more precision, and more intricate understanding of how we describe spirits using the SAT at level 2 than at level 1. And to hear more about level 2 and level 1, I'm going to start this video where we hear from Jessica Pearson, who is, well, I'll let her introduce herself.
Okay. We are very lucky to be joined right now by Jess Pearson, who is head of training at BA1 Bars. Jess, would you like to tell folks a little bit about yourself and your job and what you do?
Yeah, amazing. Hi. So I am Jess. I work for BA1 for the last 8 years now. My job is to look after the training for all of our bartenders. We take training very seriously. And so we've got about 9 different levels of bartenders across our business. So my job is to make sure that all of our teams, our 500 bartenders that we have, are engaged in some form of training. So making sure that they're constantly developing their knowledge and their skills, because we see bartending as a career. And just making sure that our wonderful, passionate, excited bartenders have enough knowledge to keep excited about the industry, really.
Yeah, I think it's one of the really cool things about the BA1 training program is it's very holistic. You've got bartender skills, round making, customer service, and and the spirits knowledge that comes with the WSET Spirits qualifications is a bit of a cornerstone there for you within that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it gives it a little bit of credibility to the training as well. Yeah, definitely.
And just in your general experience, what do students tend to get out of the WSET training? What do they walk away with?
I would say they get confidence is probably the biggest thing. Confidence to know what they're talking to, that when they're talking to our guests, that they're saying the right thing, and being able to explain the products with that knowledge and credibility backing it, I think is the biggest thing.
Great. And so your new starters, they come in and as part of their training routine, they get onto WSET level 1 after having passed certain benchmarks. Is that right?
Yeah, so we use level 1 as part of our master bartender pathway. So usually people on that pathway have been with us probably about 8 to 10 months by that point. So we teach before that very basic product knowledge, just an understanding of what spirits are and a basic understanding of the production, but nowhere near up to the level 1 of WSET. So for our master bartenders, you have to have done WSET level 1 to sign off as a master bartender.
Great. And so they then have a level of confidence when they're talking to your guests. Do you see that has any impact on your sales or their ability to host their guests?
Definitely. It means we take a lot of pride in being able to interact with our guests. It's a big part of our training. And they have the knowledge to recommend drinks, they have the knowledge to upsell confidently and actually know what they're talking about. And they also understand, when a guest is like doesn't want to listen, they because they've got a lot of knowledge, they can pick and choose what they say for the right guest for the right time.
And so, I mean, I know when I started bartending way back when, there was an awful lot of guff out there. People were self-appointed experts. So it's nice, I think, people to have that certification and that confidence. And then as they progress along the pathway, after another several months, they then get to the point where they can jump up a couple of tiers and get ready for their level 2 training.
Yeah, so the level 2 training is part of our cocktail specialist pathway. So these are our bartenders that are really excited about creating drinks. understanding flavour, understanding how to balance them, and really honing in that kind of tasting skills. And so that's part of our cocktail specialist pathway.
And do people find that jump from level 1 to level 2 challenging, or is it easy for them to approach?
The people that do our level 2 are very passionate and excited about this specific. So they're already really invested in the idea of learning. What I find really helps is, and I didn't personally do this back in the day a very long time ago, when I went straight into level 2. But what we find is that our bartenders are more confident once they've done, like doing level 2, when they've already done level 1, because that level 2 is so much information, there's so much knowledge in there, and you recap what you've done in level 1. So you've got that kind of foundational knowledge, you're already speaking the language, you understand. Yeah, it's almost like its own language. You understand the language, you're just getting more vocabulary around it.
Yeah, and I suppose within the WSET framework, there's a specific vocabulary that we use for the systematic approach to tasting, which can be a bit challenging for people to adapt to if they're a bit more experienced. So having that level 1 grounding can be quite useful when they're going to level 2.
Yeah, I think that upon reflection, when I did it, I wish I had have done the level 1, because I think it just solidifies that knowledge and you retain more of it.
It's interesting that you mentioned textures before and the complexity and the intensity, because I think a lot of times as cocktail bartenders, when you're coming up, you want to be considered as a serious gastronomic professional as well as one person to enjoy a good evening with. And that level of detailed knowledge about your working materials and your base materials that you're working with the spirits, I think can give you a lot of confidence and insight into how they can be used in interesting ways in cocktails.
Oh, definitely. And we see a massive difference when our bartenders have done the level 2, because it's like there's a big click and they get it and they understand balance and texture and flavour, and ultimately they create better drinks because of it.
Yeah, fantastic. I see when I'm teaching, sometimes you do get those little penny drop moments, don't you? When somebody goes, oh, the distillation strength is linked to the intensity, and it's like all of a sudden a light bulb goes off. I'm sure you see that a lot yourself.
Yeah, one of my favourite parts of when I'm training at WSET is we'll do all of the knowledgey bits, and then we get to the bit where they taste, and that's the bit they're actually really excited about, obviously. And before I let them anywhere near the spirit, we look at that bottle and go, right, for everything I've just told you, looking at this bottle, before we do anything, what are we expecting to taste? Now you know all that information, what are you expecting to taste? And when they start to grasp that, they know that now I can do this with this one bottle that we've talked about. I can go back to my bar where there are hundreds and hundreds of bottles and do that with everything, and without even tasting it, understand what I'm expecting based on that knowledge.
And that's really cool. I think as well, for me, when I see bartenders progressing along that career path, and again, with your operation, it's that very nicely well-structured career path that they can choose one direction or another direction. But I'm guessing you've seen people over the years with BM1 really kind of advance their careers in very unique and special ways.
Yeah, we don't want our bartenders to stay with us forever. But that would be doing them a disservice if they want to go out and go to these top 50 cocktail bars in the world and go and have the ability to create all these fantastic drinks. We have well over 100 cocktails on our menu, but we've got well over 100 bartenders, so not every bartender is going to have the opportunity, unfortunately, to get that drink on the menu and have that sense of pride. But I think when they go out into the industry and have these amazing, fantastic careers, it's really exciting. It's really exciting.
Well, I think as an educator, those moments are really what it's all about. Jess, thank you so much for giving me an insight into how level 1 and level 2 applies to you, your team, and their career pathway. And I look forward to seeing you soon and hopefully raising a glass of something very nice.
Oh, absolutely.
Cheers.
Lovely to see you. Bye.
Okay, so That's hearing from the practitioners rather than from myself, which I think is quite powerful about the impact of those courses within someone's career pathway. What we're going to do now is we're going to do a very quick overview of level 3. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but then we're going to do a short video interview with somebody who completed level 3. They were working as a bartender. They went on to become a distiller and are now working as a brand ambassador. And I think that's very illustrative of the power and the impact of level 3 as a course. So at level 3, as mentioned at the start, you learn quite a lot more. The principal production factors behind the main spirits of the world and the influence on the style, to understand really how these characteristics and labeling terms interact and how the legal frameworks and production choices influence the style of the spirit, and to understand key characteristics of pretty much all the other named global spirits in the world. Tasting at level 3 is assessed, and you're going to be assessed in your ability to describe the key characteristics of the spirits and to identify their quality level, giving supporting reasons, and identify the category. And if we look at agave spirits at level 3, you can see all of a sudden there's a whole lot more detail on the page. Look at all the different types of raw material questions. In fermentation, it gets into a lot more detail. In distillation, a whole lot more detail, because now you have a third style of distillation in clay pot stills. We talk about Maillard reactions, interaction with copper, timing of cuts, and then post-distillation, there are a whole range of spirits of choices that are available. But we're going to break this down into the processing of the raw material and then the later stages, just to see how much detail is going to be covered at level 3. So this in tequila is the laws covering tequila and the laws covering mezcal, just when it comes to processing of the raw material, nothing else. Where can the agave be grown? What type of agave must it be? Is there any processing allowed? Between mezcal artisanal, and mezcal ancestral, there are quite a lot of specific different limitations on what can be done in each different labeling term. Now that's just on the processing of the raw material. When it comes to distillation and post-distillation, it becomes quite much more of a complex picture. Not going to go through this in any detail. You're not going to be examined on this in the Q&A. No need to worry on that score. But what I wanted to do is to show this to you as an illustration of the type of level of detail that you can expect to be asked to cover at level 3 when it comes to every single category. And in every category, we will go into this level of quite granular detail, both on the production choices and on the regulations around production and labeling terms. And as well, we're going to talk about the various choices that happen within the different styles of distillation. This is probably the most simple of our distillation charts at level 3. But interestingly here, the outputs become very important when we talk about distillation using clay pot stills in agave spirits. Okay, on to tasting, the fun part. You'll notice that the SAT for level 3 is not hugely different than it is from level 2, other than for the fact that we've got more gradations in aroma intensity. We do talk about texture in a lot more detail at level 3. And we talk about the questions that impact quality level become much more nuanced at level 3 than they are at level 2, because at level 3, a student is going to be expected not just to ask these questions of every spirit that they taste for quality level, but to understand in which context each of these questions might be more applicable. So for certain spirit categories, the definition of the texture is going to be particularly important. For other spirit categories, that's going to take a back seat. For some spirit categories, how the aromas develop, they will be expected to develop in a certain pattern. In other categories, that development might not be the same. So for a level 3 graduate, you're going to really understand the context of all of these questions. Okay, so again, that's enough about me. We're going to switch over to a conversation I recently had with Kyra Elton, and she's going to talk through her experience of level 3 and how it impacted her career.
Okay, folks, we are now very lucky to be joined by Kyra Elton. Kyra is the UK brand ambassador for Heaven Hill Distillery, which makes some fantastic bourbons. Kyra, you're here to talk to us about the level 3, but before we get into that, can I ask you, give folks a little bit of background on what your spirits knowledge was before you did the WSET level 3 award in spirits?
Of course, thank you. So I was a bartender before I moved into the distilling world for an into level 3. But my spirits knowledge was really quite limited. I would say it was almost surface level because as a bartender back then, my focus was more on service and hospitality and cocktail history and culture. And then I started learning my level 1 in wine, which then meant that it opened up this whole world where I could start continuously learning now, and it showed me what structured learning could offer to my role. And I enjoyed level 1 so much that I moved into level 2 spirit. Did quite well there, which I was very thankful for, and then within a few months, I applied to do level 3.
Amazing. And you mentioned that you were a distiller and a bartender. So could you give us a little background on that as well?
Oh, yeah. So I've been in hospitality for about nearly a decade now. So worked in a lot of different sectors, and I experienced WSET and started, as I mentioned, I opened up this world, and I didn't really see myself going into management when it came to hospitality. I loved bartending and I loved working in bars, but there had to come a time where I had to make a decision of what I wanted to do. And because I did my education in spirits, I then played with this idea of working in a distillery. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know if WSET would be, enough for me to get into these spaces, but I asked a lot of distillers, from Turtle Gin. I started telling people that I wanted to move into the more production side of things, and someone who did WSET level 3 remembered that I said this and said, hey, these guys are two part-time distillers, so do you want me to put you forward? And I said, why not? What's the work? That's what happens.
Amazing. And thinking back to the knowledge that you had from the level 3, were there elements of that you felt that you could apply in that role?
To distilling?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of the whiskey process in WSET level 3 was very applicable to the whiskey making process in East London because we made English whiskey, so we didn't make traditional Scotch. But the process was still the same, came from a grain, we were brewing and fermenting on site, as well as distilling and sending it off for maturation of Lloyd. But on top of the theory, the practicality of the blind taste testing was like I couldn't have been able to learn the vocabulary firstly of how to communicate what I was smelling, what I was tasting, how to tweak little aspects of that with trusting my nose. I wouldn't have been able to have trusted my palate as much if I hadn't have had the blind tasting element of level 3.
Yeah, so it's an area that I think a lot of bartenders are interested in getting into, that distilling world, and so it's really refreshing to learn how you were able to transfer those skills. In what you do now as a brand ambassador, and you're still working very closely with bartenders, has there been that level of confidence that you took from the tasting skills and you brought into the distilling practice? Have you been able to have a similar experience with your level 3 knowledge working with bartenders and bars again?
Yes, I think it almost feels a little bit like cheating, having so much of this knowledge around spirits, because it's almost like a superpower. The minute I tell somebody that, I educated myself in spirits as well as worked in the industry, when it comes to advocacy, I just find people are much more open. They're much more willing to ask me questions, whether it be a difficult one. And even if I don't know the exact answer, I can theorize because my understanding is at a different level than it was before I did WSET. And I find that because I did WSET and I learned from different tutors also, I know how to apply the information to people like bartenders that want to nerd out, or apply that to people who are really at the start of their bartending experience. And, I've been told before, not to brag, but I was quite engaging when I was teaching these people. I mean, I'm sure the passion helps. The passion and excitement about spirits helps, but I think I'm able to apply it to different levels, which is very gratifying.
That's nice. I like that analogy of the knowledge you have and the skills you develop, being a bit of a cheat code or a superhero power. It's very cool. So level 3, when people are thinking clearly, it can be quite intimidating. There's a lot to learn, and it is quite a demanding course in terms of the commitment that you have to put into it. If you were talking to somebody who's considering taking the level 3 award in spirits, what advice would you give them?
In terms of preparing for the course, it is going to be a lot of information. The book is quite thick, but the way that I learned, and I'm not going to say this is the way that everybody else learns, but like prioritizing just a little bit of time throughout your course to learn bite-sized information, and then piecing it all together seems to be what works for me. But one of my top tips was not even one that I learned myself. Somebody else did this for me. I was still working in a bar, and I had a colleague that would come up to me once a week with a glass and just have something in it and say, "Tell me what it is." And like I saw so many humble bartenders, doing this experiment. But this like small test, you're just practicing it in real time and like trying to apply it to the everyday really helps me solidify that information and that knowledge.
That's great. I mean, I would love hearing stories about how people apply the skills and how people practice those skills and that knowledge, because it's a great qualification to have, but ultimately it's a tool and a skill set that should help you in your career in the long term.
Yeah. Always put it on my CV. Don't miss that out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time, Clara, and I hope the audience have got a lot of insight into what it takes to do well at level 3 and to what you can get out of level 3 at the other end having graduated. Cheers.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks.
Okay, folks, so there we have it. 1 or 2 little minor technical glitches along the way, but we're coming towards the end of the session. And rather than having me talk all the time, I hope that you got some valuable insight from people who've gone through the level 1, level 2, and level 3 process to see how it's impacted their career progression. Thank you, everybody, for watching. There's a feedback poll, which if you're watching live, you will be able to complete coming up on your screen. You can, however, watch this on recording. This will be available on the WSET Events Hub on YouTube, where you can catch up on our previous events. Do take the time to scan this QR code, and once you scan it, you'll be able to enter to win a WSET Level 1 course. And now, if you happen to already have WSET in wines or maybe in spirits, you still have the option of doing a Level 1 course in beer or in sake. So if you enter the competition, you were in with a chance to win a WSET Level 1 course via the WSET School in London. And to find out more, you can go to this QR code, and this QR code will take you to our Where to Study page, which can also be found on wsetglobal.com. And if you have any further questions for follow-up, please do reach out to customer service at wsetglobal.com, and your question will be directed to the appropriate recipient, and we'll be able to get back to you again. And that email address again is customerservice@wsetglobal.com. Thank you very much for your time, and best of luck with your ongoing WSET studies. Cheers.